guys, how's it going? Me? Yeah, I'm alright. The birds, though, they keep me up at night. They haunt my dreams with their beady little eyes. So in the last video, we dove into the wonderful world of raptor bird wyverns and how they've changed and not changed since Monster Hunter debuted in 2004. Check that out if you haven't already. And today we're going to turn our attention to the other half of the bird wyvern tree and delve into the ones that can actually fly. Bird wyverns are iconic, unique, and just a little bit weird, and whilst the raptors don't really capitalize on the whole bird part of their namesake so much, the flying bird wyverns certainly do. As a general rule, these guys can fly, are smaller and more lightweight than flying wyverns, but otherwise share a lot of similarities with them, and they tend to have some bird-like features, including beaks and feathers, though this isn't a hard and fast rule by any means. And so let's see if their designs and roles have remained consistent over the years, or if they've gotten a little freaky with it and switched it up. Much like with raptor bird wyverns, I'll be combining generations 1 and 2 because the nature of them means they build off and complement each other, so the designs sort of go hand in hand, I'd say. We begin with arguably the most iconic bird wyvern of them all, the Yarn Kutku. It is an exciting time for Kutku enjoyers right now, as it has just been confirmed for Monster Hunter Wilds as a returning monster, so let's jump into it. The Kutku exemplifies what it is to be a bird wyvern. Quirky, awkward, and just a little bizarre looking. It rides the line between bird and wyvern quite well, I'd say, though it does lean more wyvern, with its large beak, thin build and mannerisms, while still being clearly covered in scales without a feather in sight. In-game, it often serves as the first step up in difficulty for new players, and was in fact my first wall as a kid that caused me to step away from Monster Hunter for a time. Imagine I never returned. The entire world could be different. Its role is usually to give the player their first experience fighting a monster that uses an element. In Kutku's case, fire, and its attacks cover a wider area on account of it being larger than most other monsters encountered by that stage, keeping a new player on their toes. Kutku also established the kind of character and personality that would serve the bird wyverns well throughout the series' lifetime. Its animations and movements are certainly very bird-like, with a lot of pecking and flapping, but it also lends this air of frantic recklessness, like it's just perpetually startled by everything it sees. The Kutku was then followed up in the first game by a monster I personally have a bit of a disdain for, I'd say, though I'll keep my biases to myself for this one. It's the Gypserus. Decidedly less bird-like than many of the other flying monsters we'll cover today, the Gypserus seems to pull its inspirations from a turkey of some kind, I guess. That's what we all refer to it as anyway. It feels out of place, almost a sort of misstep for the classification it was given, and if it didn't share the majority of its animations with the Kutku, I would argue it should have just been a flying wyvern. It has a crystal atop its head that emits a bright flash, it spits globs of poison all over the place, it has a rubbery hide that reflects attacks, and it has a stretchy tail, because, well, I don't know why. Both the Kutku and the Gypserus each received a subspecies in Monster Hunter G, or Freedom, whatever you want to call it, with the blue Kutku and the purple Gypserus. Given the nature of subspecies back then, these are more akin to modern variants, changing little about the monster beyond making them more powerful. It doesn't change anything like their element, or the locales it's found in, or anything like that, unfortunately. We then have our first and pretty much only example in the mainline games of a powerful bird wyvern, the Yarn Garuga. Most people would probably be familiar with this monster as it appeared in Iceborne, but Garuga was actually first debuted as the only brand new monster featured in Monster Hunter Freedom. Functionally, it acted as an elusive monster utilizing a blend of the Kutku and the Rathian's moveset, though it was stronger than either. It was intended to be this surprising late-game threat and could actually be repelled like an Elder Dragon with damage carrying over to the next hunt. It met its concept pretty well, I think, luring the player into a false sense of security by being visually similar to one of the game's introductory monsters. It brings to mind something like a cuckoo bird infiltrating another bird's nest before killing all the other hatchlings. It demonstrated that bird wyverns don't have to be weak, though it would remain the exception and not the rule moving forward. The Garuga that was introduced originally would later be deemed a variant known as the Scarred Yarn Garuga in Iceborne, which also makes this the only monster to technically have its variant introduced prior to its standard form. Though before Iceborne, the scarred and non-scarred versions were just the same monster, and the models were interchangeable between games, with one usually being in a game whilst the other was missing. And last up before moving on to the third generation is Monster Hunter Freedom Unite's Hypnocatrice. The Hypnoc is the first undeniably bird-like addition to today's video. Its design inspiration could probably be taken from a wide range of birds, but it reads to me as a mix between a peacock and an ostrich. Its basic moveset is based around kicking with its very large feet and spitting out sleep gas. Hypnocatrice was a G-rank exclusive monster, but it was still an introductory one, being found found at the beginning of G rank to serve as our first step into the Great Forest map. It's not a particularly threatening monster as a result, filling the typical bird wyvern niche quite well. Now I know what you're thinking, you're heading down to the comments section, you're writing, actually Pig Ginge, the Hypnocatrice was introduced in Monster Hunter Frontier Season 1.0 alongside the Lavasioth before showing up in Freedom Unite. And yes, it was. Timeline-wise, it came out there first, though it was planned for the mainline games well before that introduction, with both teams developing it and Lavasioth in tandem. You can actually find concept for both of these monsters in the Gen 1 art books as well. So those are the Flying Bird Wyverns found in the first 2 generations. How are things going so far? Well, at this stage, they're a little all over the place, with some gaps that will need to be filled in the future. It's pretty clear they want to be a little silly, and appear as these early to mid-game threats intended to show off and get the player accustomed to an increase in difficulty, demonstrating this through the use of ailments. This is made even more evident when including the raptors. Garuga shakes it up, and as I said earlier, ends up being the exception and not the rule, which works in its favor as being this sort of bait and switch fake out monster because it's more than just a harder Kutku. Design wise, they're pretty diverse. Kutku is more reptilian than bird, but still undeniably bird-like. Garuga looks similar, but that's the point of its design. It's not just some lazy copy, it's meant to be a darker relative of the Kutku. Hypnocatrice is very bird-like, drawing inspirations from several different sources. And then there's Gypsarus. It's just a weird monster that doesn't really mesh with others in its class. It's a bit of a jumbled mess, and not in the good way that Kutku is, and if not for reusing Kutku's animations, it probably would have served better to have been classified as a smaller flying wyvern, similar to how Paolumu is in World. So we're off to a solid start, but we need some more oomph to really kick the bird wyverns into gear. Will we find it in Generation 3? Yes we will. Pause. Quick little call to action. I see you there enjoying this content, but apparently nearly 90% of y'all aren't subscribed. Hit that subscribe button for new Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter adjacent videos on the regular. You know you want to. Alright, back to it. With Monster Hunter Tri kicking things up a notch and going for a brand new vibe, we move on to the only brand new Flying Bird Wyvern from the 3rd generation, but it is an absolutely exquisite design. It's the Kurapeka. To this day, Kurapeka remains one of the most unique monsters we've ever gotten in the series. A bird wyvern that absolutely oozes personality, that is a joy to watch and fight, that can also be really easy to hate in the moment, but it's just so charming that the hate does not last. Kurapeka specializes in singing songs with a variety of effects, doing so by inflating its huge red neck sac and blowing air out of its trumpet-shaped beak. It takes inspiration from songbirds, but also frigate birds. It's got a lot going on, but I think it comes together nicely from a visual design perspective. It can boost its attack and defense, heal itself, but most importantly, it can call out to other monsters to help by mimicking their cries and apply those buffs to them as well. It does these happy little dances if it successfully completes the song, and it runs away and falls flat on its face if you interrupt them. It's just the best. Couple all of this with a slew of unique animations, including its walk cycle as it bobs its head along, its breath attack where it slams its flint-like hands together to ignite its saliva, and its tail whips, and you get an incredibly iconic monster that needs to make a return at some point. It fills a role similar to Kutku in terms of game progression, being a weaker monster that introduces the player to the fire element, whilst also differentiating itself by adding the defense down status, the songs, and even being this pseudo group style fight as it summons other monsters to assist it. It's a Flying Bird Wyvern that perfectly demonstrates what it is to be one. Lighthearted, chaotic, and fun. And whilst it doesn't really break new ground in terms of difficulty, its charm and personality really make it stand out. I should also mention its subspecies as well, the Crimson Kurapeko. It's quite similar to the standard version. Crimson Kurapeko is red, blue, and yellow instead of the normal ones, greens and browns. The flints on its wings now produce an electric spark as opposed to the flames. It can sing a song that recovers stamina and another that causes nearby monsters to become instantly enraged. Given that it does more damage and appears later in the games, it also has a tendency to call more dangerous monsters as well, including things like Devil Joe and Stygian Zenogre. That said, it's so appealing because base Kurapeko already did all the heavy lifting. We then jump straight into Generation 4. Much like the Raptor Bird Wyverns, there's nothing brand new in either Monster Hunter 4 or 4 Ultimate, so we jump straight into Generations where we get yet another iconic and definitive Flying Bird Wyvern in the form of Malfestio. Malfestio leans a bit further towards bird than wyvern, but it fits nicely into its design space. It resembles a giant blue owl with facial markings reminiscent of a mime or a clown, and all in all it has a motif that brings to mind a magician or a court jester. This is twofold with its ability to put hunters to sleep and to inflict confusion, which is an ailment unique to this monster, which inverts the player's controls. Its attacks involve a lot of hopping up in the air and swooping down at you and kicking at you with its feet, as well as a few heavy slams with its wings. It should also be noted that Malfestio is a somewhat more difficult bird wyvern than most that came before it. It's not quite Garuga level, but it's still an example of a solidly mid-range bird wyvern which served to grow their design space even further. Much like the Great Macaw discussed in the previous video, Malfestio has got a really solid way of conveying the personality of the monster, particularly in rage mode with the way that its head whips around 180 degrees to face the player before the rest of the body rotates as well. This plays well into the whole owl aesthetic, as well as being a little unsettling and surprising when you see it for the first time. Malfestio is not just unique for a bird wyvern, it's just a super unique monster for the series as a whole. If you'd like to learn more about it, check out this video I made. Speaking of Malfestio, Generations also introduced the Deviants to the series, and so far are the only 2 games to feature them. Deviants are especially powerful monsters that have overcome some sort of great hardship, becoming stronger for it, and they require a special permit to hunt. The bird wyverns were graced with 2 Deviants, the first being Nightcloak Malfestio. Building on Malfestio's pre-established motif and vibes, this thing amps it up by producing larger confusion clouds and now has the ability to turn invisible and steal items from the player, again playing into that magician and sleight of hand idea. Its visual design is also intentionally more sinister than normal Malfestio, with red webbing on its wings and tail, and the tail itself forming something akin to this giant 4-clawed hand. The second deviant was the Deadeye Yarn Garuga. This isn't super different from Scarred Garuga we already have, as they are each missing an eye and have a damaged ear. However, Deadeye Garuga leaves behind a glowing red trail from its eye as it moves, and features bright green on its wings and tail. Contrary to most of the other deviants as well, it's also considerably smaller than its standard form. In terms of the fight itself, it's mainly a more aggressive Garuga and has more potent poison. Before we jump into Generation 5, I think this is a good stopping point to see how the Flying Bird Wyverns are progressing. Whereas monster classes like the Fanged Beasts aim to shake it up with each generation and deliver something brand new, the Bird Wyverns have more so aimed to refine what their goal is, develop on the tropes they've established, and breathe some wonderful life and character into the monsters themselves. They continue to have this focus on status elements over elements, and whilst there isn't a huge range of new additions, only 2 not counting the variations, they each did some massive heavy lifting in terms of their theming. Kiripeko is nearly perfect in its design and implementation as an early monster with a few tricks up its sleeve, and Malfestio bridges the gap between the likes of Garuga and everything else we've gone over today without being this crazy powerful monster just for the sake of it, demonstrating that not all bird wyverns are pushovers, but they fit into the mid-game just as well as the early game. The monster variations we went over also sort of bolster each of these monsters to give them a bit more difficulty and fill some of the gaps that bird wyverns have in that regard, with the Garuga Deviant feeling a little whatever, a little redundant in my opinion. Things are going well. With so many new additions, Capcom has somehow really solidified the bird wyverns and made them very unique. So how do things hold up heading into Monster Hunter World? Monster Hunter World was a massive success and brought a whole lot of new attention over to Monster Hunter as a whole. With so many new eyeballs now on the series, a new roster of monsters joined the fray as well, and they had to make a big impression. We've been over Kuriyaku and Shizuyaku previously, so let's talk about Puke Puke. Puke fits neatly into the same category as Kutku and Kiripeko in that it fills the niche of early game but slightly harder than everything else so far monster. Rather than the usual fire element though, Puke spits poison everywhere, and whilst it has feathers, it's clearly not very bird-like. Its independently moving eyes, giant tongue, zygodactyl feet, and flexible tail all scream lizard, particularly a chameleon, and frankly, given that it shares a body plan and even parts of its model with Paolumu, it should probably just be a flying wyvern, but I digress. Puke Puke doesn't do much to break the mold, rather keeping with the light-hearted tone of other early game bird wyverns. This guy also has a subspecies in Iceborne known as the Coral Puke Puke. It's more vibrantly coloured with bright yellows, reds and blues, and specialises in spraying high-pressure water blasts from its tail and mouth. It lives in the Coral Highlands and has some cool environmental interaction with the water reservoirs found throughout. It differentiates itself nicely from normal Puke Puke, but it would have been cool if the normal one got high-pressure poison jets in G-Rank though. Then rounding out Generation 5, we jump on over to Monster Hunter Rise for, yep, you guessed it, an introductory flying bird wyvern in the form of the Acnosom. Acnosom is less goofy and more intimidating than the monsters of this level that came before it, given that its inspirations are drawn from cranes and the yokai Kasa Obake. It certainly feels a little more powerful than your Kutkus and your Kiripekos of the world, but not by much.
Its white and red coloring is pretty striking, its movement mimicking an umbrella is pretty captivating, and its giant head crest makes for a unique silhouette that works quite well. It doesn't really break any new ground, but it's still a welcome addition that comes across slightly more serious and fearsome than its contemporaries. And that is all for the mainline series as of right now. Whilst bird wyverns are confirmed to be returning in Monster Hunter Wilds, the only flying one we've seen so far is the return of the cuckoo, but I'm pretty confident there will be at least one new one making an appearance, so who's to say what we might see in the future. I think the class is at a really good point as of right now. There's the odd misstep, but overall they fill the niche of early to mid-game monsters very well, and they have this unique sense of character to them. But I would be remiss to not go through the list of bird wyverns exclusive to the spin-offs like Monster Hunter Frontier and Online, because there are some excellent additions there as well. I myself haven't experienced them, but my friend Skoyskull was kind enough to help me out with some Frontier footage, so go and check him out if you haven't already. Alright, let's have a quick stroll down memory lane for those that know about these monsters, or a fun first look for those that don't. Kicking things off with Frontier, where it drops the ball on new Raptor Bird Wyverns, it certainly picks it up once again with its Flying Bird Wyverns. As Hypnocatrice was featured more heavily in Frontier than Freedom Unite, it got not one, not two, but three variations. The first is a variant known as the Breeding Season Hypnocatrice, which is simply a male Hypnocatrice in, yeah, you guessed it again, the breeding season. It features more vibrant colours with feathers that range from red to an almost neon electric blue. It is otherwise very similar to normal Hypnocatrice, simply being slightly stronger and tougher with the odd extra attack. It then gets a rare species in the form of the Silver Hypnocatrice, which is blue and silver, far stronger, has far more potent sleep attacks, and can cause tremors when attacking. It then got the Zenith treatment towards the end of Frontier's lifespan, which is visually similar to normal Hypnocatrice, except for, you know, the gigantic toucan/hornbill beak it has going on, and it's just about as wild as all the other Zenith fights. As with a lot of Frontier monsters, these serve to give us a taste of the weird and wonderful world of very powerful bird wyverns due to the need to constantly increase power and difficulty that comes with a live service MMO. But there are more to come. Whananoku is up next. Its body is teal with yellow feathers and accents, and is easily identifiable by its big fluffy yellow mane of feathers. It uses electricity to ward off enemies, and can be found dancing throughout the Great Forest and desert mats. Next up is a personal favourite of mine, and I always butcher this name, Thora Karuru. Oh boy. This thing is just super cool looking, and I believe may be the largest bird wyvern we've seen to date. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure. This thing lies somewhere in the zone of Hummingbird meets Phoenix or Thunderbird. It's exclusively fought in a map known as the Flower Field, where it will feed on nectar from the flowers to gain different abilities, changing colour as it does. This monster's build is actually more reminiscent of a flying wyvern, being bulkier than the average bird wyvern, and they are far better at flying, remaining airborne for the majority of the fight. Then finishing off Frontier, there's Torridcless, which has its standard form and a zenith form. Torridcless is another one that's more reminiscent of a flying wyvern with its bulkier build and larger size, though it maintains a few bird-like features that keep it within bird wyvern. Its face and beak bring to mind a bird of prey, and it's covered in white feathers with larger blue ones coming from its head and wings. It can convert solar energy into electricity to empower its attacks, and it can flash stun the hunter like a Gypsaurus can. Its zenith form emphasizes its features like most other zenith monsters do, making it spikier and overall more aggressive and over the top, firing off beams of pure solar energy as it does. Just imagine the most angry bird you've ever seen, and like times it by 100, that's Zenith Torridcless. This guy is probably the best example of what a bird wyvern looks like if it's at the level of an Apex monster. And I mean Apex like Rathalos, not Apex like Apex Rathalos. Moving on. Frontier served one primary purpose for the bird wyvern class, and that was to make them powerful. Never before or since have we seen so many bird wyverns hit quite as hard and be quite as scary as they were in Frontier. It was a shake-up for sure, and I do hope we get to see some of these monsters again in the future one day. Moving on to the other MMO, Monster Hunter Online brings a more lackluster and less interesting cohort of bird wyverns, unfortunately. The only brand new one was the Kramen, which is just hideous. It's like a yellow Gypsaurus with bright orange hair. I mean, who would want orange hair? Like, come on. Its whole shtick is that it has this mucus that is explosive, spinning it about and causing the desert to blow up. It also has a subspecies known as the Ice Kramen, which, as the name may suggest, has ice saliva instead of explodey fire saliva. There's then a couple of variations for existing bird wyverns, another Hypnocatrice, and another Garuga. The Golden Hypnocatrice is a lone species variation, which were exclusive to Online, and just appears to be a Hypnocatrice with gold feathers and more potent sleep abilities. Nothing too exciting there. The one-eared Garuga is yet another variant of Garuga with a messed up face. This poor guy cannot keep his eyes and ears intact, unfortunately. It's got some red highlights going on, but otherwise doesn't seem like anything special. Let me know down below if I'm missing something, if it's got anything exciting going on that sort of sets it apart from every other Garuga. And this would be the part where we would now rattle off all the fun and exciting crossover monsters present in things like Monster Hunter Explore, but unfortunately, the Bird Wyverns just don't get any crossovers at all. And so all we are left with is the last and quite possibly least monster on today's list, the Delma Iapre, a large flying bird wyvern exclusive to the Monster Hunter Orage manga. It has the ability to petrify things, turning its enemies into glass and dulling the hunter's weapons. And no, I don't know why it's called that when we already have the Iapre, probably a translation thing. I don't know. And that's all, folks. 2 videos and 49 monsters later, we come to the end of our avian adventure. The Bird Wyverns have had a hell of a ride over the last 20 years, and have grown to be amongst the most iconic groups within the Monster Hunter series, rivaling the Flying Wyverns and the Elder Dragons in that respect. They're a group that is, at the same time, widely diverse and very thematically consistent, delivering on the goal of being lower tier threats, whilst doing so in a variety of different ways, and remaining instantly recognizable. Outside of the mainline series, they even succeed at being more substantial threats and run the entire gamut from introductory to super late game. Bird Wyverns offer a touch of the light-hearted personality that makes Monster Hunter so unique in a world of grim dark fantasy games, and I'm excited to see how they continue to develop in the future.